Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. You are invited to join me, your host, Stan Mallow, each week when I interview a different guest of note in their respective field. The unexplained, the mysterious, the macabre, UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomena. We explore them all on Paranormal Yacker. Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. My guest in today's show is Malcolm Robinson, a man who has spent decades researching, investigating, and documenting UFOs and various aspects of the paranormal. In 1979, he formed his own research society, Strange Phenomena Investigations, often referred to by its initials, SPI. Malcolm is the assistant editor of UFO Matrix magazine and was the first Scotsman to give a lecture on UFOs in America when he lectured at the 18th Annual International UFO Conference in Laughlin, Nevada. He has authored several books, and I'll be speaking about one of them with him on the show. The book we'll be discussing is the A70 UFO Incident, Scotland's first officially reported UFO abduction. Malcolm Robinson, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be on your show. Thank you.
What was the reason, Malcolm, the backstory, if you will, if indeed there is one, for you giving your book the title you did, that being the A70 UFO Incident?
Well, I've written a number of books, and part of that case was featured in one of my earlier books, UFO Case Files of Scotland, Volume 1. But I realised it had to have a standalone book because there was so much more involved with that case that I couldn't do it justice in the original book. I just done a standalone book on this case. It's Scotland's first officially reported UFO abduction. There may well be more, but we at this present time are not aware of them. Clearly, this was a massive book. It had to be standalone. It had to have its own audience. It goes to show that Scotland as a nation has been touched by the UFO presence and abduction scenario. So it was great to get that into the public domain.
When, Malcolm, did the events covered in the A70 UFO incident take place, and in what section of Scotland did they occur?
Well, it happened on an August evening, August the 17th in 1992. I'll just briefly tell you the story. We can go into it, more fuller shortly. But these men, Gary Wood, who was the driver of the car, and Colin Wright, who was the passenger, had no interest in UFOs whatsoever. They were aware of it, like most people are, through the television, through newspapers, but it was not a big part of their lives. They just felt that, it's all nonsense. There are no such things as UFOs, etc. Where they left from their hometown or the home city of Edinburgh on this August evening of 1992. They were travelling down to see some friends in a small village called Tarbrax in South Lanarkshire. So you're talking about the central belt of Scotland. That's where this event transpired. Before we go into some questions, I'll tell you what happened. There they are. They're in the car. They've left up the built-up city of Edinburgh, the big buildings, etc. And then they start driving out. And as they drive and leave Edinburgh, it goes to countryside. There are fields on either side, a little house here, pure grassland, and that's where the event transpired.
Could you, Malcolm, provide me with a brief profile of the men who had the alien encounter and tell me how they described what they initially saw on that fateful day when they were abducted?
Colin Wright, who was 25 years of age at the time, and he was a local painter and decorator. So his job was effectively to go into people's homes and, paint ceilings and walls. And Gary Wood was 29 years of age at the time, and he worked for the ambulance service in Edinburgh as an ambulance repairman. He's now moved on to other things, and that was their day-to-day job. But as they were driving down this stretch of road, and it was a lovely evening, they were listening to the radio, they were talking about football, they were talking about mundane things. And as they approached a blind bend, it curved to the left. They were astonished to see a two-tiered, black, shiny, disc-shaped object hovering about 20, 30 feet above the surface of the road. They knew straight away, well, this is not a conventional aircraft. aircraft. This is not a helicopter. What the hell is this thing? Now, at this point, they could have stopped the car and went back the way, but they didn't. If you can imagine, this is a UFO and this is a car. As the car was directly underneath this hovering UFO, it emitted a silver shimmering curtain like mist, like particles, descended from beneath the UFO and hit the top of the car. And at that point, both men were enveloped in total and inky blackness. They couldn't see their hands in front of their face. They couldn't see each other. They couldn't see the dashboard of the car. Gary's initial thoughts were, am I dead? Is this what death is? Seconds later, but we don't really know if it was seconds later, but what appeared to them to be seconds later, they regained their sight. The car was on the right-hand side of the road. Of course, here in the UK, we drive on the left. The car was over on the right-hand side of the road, and Gary had to pull the steering wheel to take the car back to the left-hand side of the road, and they screamed to their destination of Tarbrax. Now, when they got there, they knocked on the occupant's door. And eventually the door was opened by the lady who they were going to see. And she says, what time do you call this? What do you mean, what time? You're an hour and a half late. Where have you been? Now, the journey should only have taken about 35 minutes. And they were an hour and a half past that. And I'll tell you shortly what happened after that. But that's, to answer your question, that's the part of the journey where they saw the object and they went to the people's house and they were an hour and a half missing time.
Did the abductees, Gary and Colin, say how they were transported to the spacecraft? Were they beamed up? Did the alien beings physically take them there? Or, as is the case for many abductees, they just found themselves on the craft and have no recollection how they got there?
Well, I'm going to answer all those questions in tandem. When they were in the person's house and they were all excited, give me paper, I need to draw what we saw. So they were drawing this two-tiered black craft. That night and subsequent nights thereafter, I'll come back to your question, they had strange dreams of these small grey beings, 3.5 to 4 feet tall, typical black, inky, almond-shaped eyes, something like the wee fella you've got behind you there, the pear-shaped head, and came into their dreamscape. Then they found scars in their body that previously were not there. We all know our bodies. We all know we go into the shower, we go into the bath, we know our bodies. Where the hell did this come from? And then Gary said, well, surely this cannot be one of those crazy UFO stories. But what if it is? What have we seen? What the bloody hell was that? So his protocol was he went to the local library and he picked up a book at the paranormal UFO section. It was a book written by the wonderful Jenny Randalls, who was a prolific British authoress, wonderful researcher. Our address, SPI's address, was at the back of that book, and he phoned me and I listened to him, and he was desperate for answers like most people are. And I says, look, come and see me at my house. Now, at that time, I advocated the use of hypnotic regression. And as I say, we'll come to that main question shortly. And I asked Gary, do you want to go under hypnosis, Gary, just to see if perhaps something else may have happened that night? May not, but he says, Malcolm, I will try anything. I just need to know what happened because I can't sleep. I've got these scars in my body. My wife does not believe me. My friends does not believe it. I'm ridiculed. Malcolm, I'll try anything. I says, well, look, hypnosis, it's got its pitfalls because confabulate, it could be cryptomnesia, something you've read as a small child surfaces under hypnosis, and you talk about it as if it's you and it's not you. You've read it as a book as a child. But having said that, the police use it extensively in police cases. He says, Malcolm, let's do it. Long story short, to answer your question, I invited Gary and Colin to my home and we used a qualified hypnotherapist who's very, very good, diplomas everywhere, and she took them back, both men back independently to that August evening. And your typical, with some changes, your typical abduction scenario unfolded. And what that was as follows. That's the recall. The recall was a car underneath this object, bang, the silver mist hitting the car. That's a conscious recall. They cannot remember anything other than that. Under hypnosis, some of this may sound strange, and I can only hope that your viewers can say, I can relate to that. So what I'm about to tell you has differences from the normal abduction scenario, but I'm hoping some of your viewers may know what I'm talking about. They were taken, to answer your question, they were taken out of their car by about half a dozen of these small grey beings. One of the men was placed on a flat raised stretcher. That's correct. I have never heard of that in ufology before. Nobody was touching this. None of these grey beings were holding the stretcher. They were away from it. And it was free floating. And they were taken on board this object. We presume it's this object. The interior of this object was kind of silvery grey. There was a kind of cool temperature. It wasn't warm. It wasn't hot. It was very polished. It was very silvery. They were both independently taken to separate rooms on board this craft. I have here, I don't know if it will come over so well. When we are talking to witnesses, we also ask them to fill out UFO sighting account forms. This form here is by Gary Wood, and as you can see, he's got glitter. He's actually put glitter beneath the drawing of the craft just to show me how this was. Colin found himself encased and well, we'll come to that in a moment. I want to show you some drawings now. This is a drawing done by Colin Wright. It's an original sketch done by Colin Wright. He was stripped naked and he was placed in this curved chair. He said that some of these small beings did not all have the pear-shaped head. Some of them had indented heads at the top. Here's the rub. Some of these creatures had green, yellow, and red perforations under the black almond-shaped eyes. Now, I personally have never heard of this in UFO lore. That's why I'm hoping maybe some of your viewers may be aware of that. Another strange thing was that the neck of these creatures didn't go into the torso. It extended onto the chest. Again, another aspect of ufology that I'm not aware of. Colin also found himself, and this again is an original witness sketch, Colin found himself encased, sitting down completely naked, strapped at the wrist, strapped at the legs, in this glass or perspex chamber. And what you're looking at here is a bird's eye view looking down, where several other chambers was all around him. People, young, old, completely naked. And he was really terrified at this. And at this point, there was a strange device that came up from the floor of that. Again, this is Colin's drawing. This device came up from the floor towards his head and started to spin around. Its purpose? We don't know. Can you imagine a caveman going into a hospital today, looking at all the machinery? He wouldn't understand that. So we don't know what that was. Again, this is another drawing of one of these small creatures done by Colin. I mean, nobody's a great drawer, but we're not artists, you know, but he did his best. Gary Wood. This is Gary Wood's sketch. Now, what's going on here is, this is Gary lying, this is a bird's eye view of Gary completely naked, lying on this table, and it was a can-shaped device, about 3.5 foot. If you can imagine a can of beans, it's only about 7-8 inches. Well, this was about 3 foot tall, came up from the floor, started to spin around his head. At this point, Gary could not move a muscle. He could only move his eyes. And he says, Malcolm, I desperately wanted to punch one of these wee fellas. He says, but I couldn't. I could only move my eyes. And then he suddenly saw, and again, I'm not used to this in UFO lore, a small being coming out. He described it like a pool of liquid gel, like a man's shaving gel, started to formulate on the floor of this craft. He could only use his eyes to look down, and coming out of this was one of these small creatures. And I says, Gary, you've drawn what appears to be ribs on this creature. Do you think that's ribs? And he thought for a moment. He went, you know what, Malcolm, I don't. I think it's heavy folds of skin. I mentioned this can-shaped device that came up from the floor. This is again Gary lying on this flat raised bed, the can-shaped device. Part of it levered up like that. It came up like that, and there were two what resembled LED lights at the apex of that. And it was spinning around his head. Here's a better illustration of that one there. It was spinning around his head. Again, the purpose of this, we don't know. Was it to some form of examination, etc.? Here's another one. Gary is lying on this flat raised table, you can see in front of you there, and he was looking above him. It was like an onyx stone, a gentleman's stone in his ring, about several feet wide, spinning, oscillating above him. And again, he doesn't know what happened there. And as you can see, a small grey arm just fell on his chest at that point. And when we were using hypnosis, that's when he came out of hypnosis. I says, what happened? And he mentioned this small arm. This is another sketch by Gary. Again, you can see a completely different entity. Now, this one has a heart-shaped head as opposed to the almond-shaped heads. Very brown, very wrinkled. Again, you don't see that a lot in ufology. Very, very few cases. And he says, Malcolm, I was extremely terrified of this wee guy. Not so much the greys, but this wee guy here. He says, I was really terrified. Probably the most interesting drawing that Gary did for our society was the one I'm about to show show you now. So again, picture the scene. Your viewers, picture the scene. This Scotsman's lying on this raised table, completely naked, immobilized, can't move a muscle. He can only move his eyes. Then suddenly, so this is the table there. These small beings with what Gary says were not ribs but heavy folds of skin were putting up and down his body. It was as if it was like a pendulum, this kind of pendulum-like effect. And for what purpose, we don't know. But the most incredible thing was this girl here. He says, Malcolm, as I looked down to my left, I saw a naked female. She was probably about 18 or 19 years of age. She had shaggy permed hair, completely naked. She had her knees up under her chin. She had her arms around her knees, and she gently turned her head and looked at me. And the tears were running down her face. He says, Malcolm, I'll never forget the desperation in that woman's face.
What method, Malcolm, did the alien beings employ to communicate with Gary and Colin? Was it done telepathically? Did the ET speak English, or was a different mode of communication used?
Great question. Absolutely great question. It followed the normal line. It was telepathy. They never spoke. The words formulated in his head. It was English, yeah. It wasn't metallic. It was just like a soft gentleman speaking, you know. And like usual is, we are not here to harm you. And Gary says, he couldn't speak either. Gary says, why? Why are you doing this to me? What's the reason? And what followed next was incredible, because what these creatures said to Gary telepathically was sanctuary. And I says, Gary, what did he say? He says, they want sanctuary. Really? And he says, yeah. I says, Malcolm, I've got to tell you what they said. And that's what they said. They had 3 to 4 fingers. He's not sure if they had 3 fingers or 4, but some of them were kind of, it was like a ball on the middle part and a bulbous bit at the fingertip there as well. So it wasn't just like our fingers, you know. They were grey, bluey, translucent skin. He didn't discern any feet because from his elevation, he couldn't really look down that far. And it was all perplexing to him, you know, and all this was tumbling out under hypnosis.
Quite often we hear from experiencers that the beings who abducted them gave them messages they wanted to be conveyed to the inhabitants on our planet. Was that the case with Gary and Colin?
No, we did actually probe for that. You know, obviously in any investigation, you can't leave an investigation without asking an array of questions. You don't want to go home and say, God, I never asked that. We asked that question and they never said that. He says, Malcolm, they're here in the sense they're very, very close to Earth and they have a purpose. They keep talking about sanctuary. We all know what sanctuary means, a place of comfort, a place of joy. Well, why would they want that? What annoys me, that these little people, I'd like to use a very stronger word, but I better watch what I say. I've been doing abductions for many, many years. Now, some people, some researchers in the States and Canada and what have you, say that it's some form of genetic interbreeding. They're looking for sperm and ova to repopulate a dying planet. It sounds Steven Spielberg. It may be right, but I don't know. I've spoken to other people, females who have been abducted, then re-abducted, and shown a hideous, half-human, half-alien child. And telepathically, they were told, this belongs to you. And the lady I spoke to says, Malcolm, it was horrible. Little tufts of hair, and it was this wee little alien face, and I didn't want anything to do with it. But they wanted to give this child back to the mother, if it was the mother, for to touch and get that motherly feeling. So there is an agenda. Getting back to my point, why, oh, why have they been doing this for over 40, 50, 60 years? Surely they have enough genetic information that they don't need to do this. Maybe it's something else. Maybe they're looking for souls. Maybe it's their very, very soul they're trying to find out what makes us human beings tick. But it's very distressing. I get asked all the time, is it pleasant? By Christ, it's not. You know, these things will take you, as we know, from the comfort of your own bed, from the comfort of your own car. They'll switch off your partner, male or female. They are not aware of it. It's soul destroying for the people who are going through this, and they're still going through it. But it is a generational thing. It appears to me that we have people who their fathers have been abducted. Their father's father, their grandfather's been abducted. It goes through a family tree. Are there any significance of that? So there are all these questions, and we don't have all the answers.
For how long a period of time were Gary and Colin aboard the spacecraft? And when they returned to Earth, was it near where they were originally abducted, or did they find themselves at a different location?
Another great question. What happened was, we don't truly know how long they were on board this craft. All we do know, there was about an hour and a half missing time. Maybe that's the time they were on board. When they regained consciousness in the car, that's where they were deposited back in the car. They were like, it's just switched back on, because you're quite correct. Some people find themselves away from where they were abducted. It could be maybe several hundred yards away. They may have their shirt on the wrong way around, which, if you're dealing with a futuristic alien technology, surely you would know to put the clothes back on the correct way. Sometimes we know that that's not the case. Again, what's going on there? They found themselves back in the car, and that's when they drove off back to Terbrax, yeah.
When Gary and Colin found themselves back on planet Earth, did they have any discussions with each other about what happened to them and how they were going to proceed from that point on?
I mean, obviously they knew, well, what Gary said to you, he says, Malcolm, I'll be honest with you. I said, please, be honest. I need to know everything, no matter how small it is, tell me. I can't remember how we got home. What do you mean? I remember going into the person's house who we were going to see, tell them all about this craft, but I can't really remember how we got home. I'm pretty sure we went a different route. And when we did get back to Edinburgh, I remember the bit from Edinburgh, Gary says, but not getting there. We went to see somebody. We did gingerly speak about it in the car going back, like what happened. But we were too, I don't know the right word, we were too just, it was so crazy we didn't want to really say anything. We both knew something had impacted on our lives. And rather than talk, we were silent. We just more or less said what happened.
How was Gary and Colin's life changed after the abduction in regard to the relationships with family, friends, neighbors, business associates, and even members of the clergy of whatever religious denomination with which they were affiliated?
Yeah, obviously, like any person that goes through this abduction experience, it can be very traumatizing. Other people, who didn't like painting, they may have painted wonderful pictures, scenes, etc. They change their life for the good. But in the main, a lot of people are traumatized, and that was the case with Gary. Now, I mentioned earlier in the show that Gary's wife did not believe a word he was saying. That's a bit upsetting, because you think when you're married to a person, you share their lives, you share their stories, but she didn't believe him. But one night, she telephoned me at my home, and this is what happened. Picked up the phone, and it was Gary's wife. Malcolm, can I apologise to you? What for? What do you mean? Well, last night, Gary and I was in bed. Gary was sleeping next to me. I was reading a book. I had the small table lamp at the side of the bed, reading a book. Closed the book, put the book down on the table, switched the light off, and about 27 to 30 seconds later, small, clammy hands, like childlike hands, grabbed her ankles and pulled her forcibly down the bed. Now, whereas her head was on the pillow, it's now halfway down the bed. She looked, and it was like something out of Stargate. The bedroom wall was fluctuating. It was like you had a stone, and you had threw the stone in a quiet mill pond with all the concentric ripples moving away. 3 small grey beings were standing at the foot of the bed. In surprise that she saw that, maybe she was meant to be switched off. She wasn't. They let go of her ankles, and they just went back through the wall, and they just disappeared. Another story I can tell you, and she says, Malcolm, I'm so sorry. I totally believe my husband now. I mean, wow, when it happens to yourself. On another occasion, Gary was in his car with his sons, and this was a few years after the 1992 event, probably 1994, I guess. And he was driving again, fields on either side, not a built-up area. And then suddenly, this wall of tremendous white came over the dashboard of his car, penetrated through the glass, and flooded into the car. His sons are screaming, Dad, 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 what's going on here? And Gary was saying to himself, no, not another, no, I don't need this, not with my kids. As soon as he said that, the light evaporated, just like a mist that evaporated. So we could say that maybe that was the start of possible another abduction. But Gary said, I don't need it, I don't want it. And that was scary as well,
Did members of the military or any other government agency ever contact Gary and Colin about their abduction?
Good question. To all my knowledge and to all my deliberations with Gary and Colin, that never happened. And if it did, they never told me about it. You could say, was the phones tapped, etc., any strange clicks on the phone? Gary says he didn't notice if there were any strange clicks, but certainly as people knocking on the door, coming to talk to them. What happened was that this was big. This was Scotland's biggest UFO abduction case. Never been heard of before. I says, there must be other people in Scotland who had has this experience and are frightened to come forward. And I said to Gary and Colin, guys, I need you, for both of you to be up front. Put your hands up, come with me to the media and let the media know about this story, because I'm hopeful that other people may come forward. Well, I don't know. Gary was very reluctant. I don't think I want to do that. Long story short, I convinced Gary and Colin to do it. I wish I never had, because it was featured in a 2-page spread and they got the proverbial taken out of them. It was a total Mickey take. Really, really poking fun at both witnesses. And I vowed never ever to do that again with the witnesses. And that's the problem we have. For anybody out there, no matter if it's America, Canada, wherever, for every 2 persons who say, I want to come forward, I saw this strange craft, there may be 5 people behind them. I'd like to come forward, but I don't want the embarrassment of coming forward. So we are missing out not only on UFO abduction stories, but on UFO stories as well.
When it comes to humans being abducted by alien beings, it seems in many instances, members of the same family tend to be the subjects of those abductions generation after generation. And you spoke about that previously in our conversation. What I would like to know, Malcolm, if that's the same scenario with Gary and Colin.
Yeah, we did ask about that. I did ask Gary and Colin if they had spoke to family members to see if anything happened to them. And I'll be honest with you, like I always, with everybody I say, the family members said, no, we can't recall anything happening to us. Now, whether the things did happen to them, maybe if they were hypnotized, we don't know. But they certainly didn't want to come forward. Another strange, bizarre, and I'm on your show, and I've always liked to tell you, your good self and your lovely viewers, all I can remember about this case. Now, what I'm about to tell you may sound preposterous, may sound silly, but I'm still at liberty to tell you. And this is what Gary said, one of the witnesses. He says, Malcolm, I always seem to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm so agitated, I just can't sleep. And one morning, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and one of these small greys was standing at the foot of my bed. I jumped up, I ran over to him, and I punched him on his chin, and he fell back like an acrobat somersault at the circus. He tumbled a few times back, then he sprung to his feet, and he rushed at me, Malcolm. This wee grey rushed at me, and as soon as he hit me, bang, a big explosion of light, and I was out. I woke up on the floor in my bedroom, and I says, look, could that not have been a dream? Malcolm, no, not at all. He says, this was real. I was wide awake. This happened. And again, this is why I like coming on your show, because I'm not aware of anybody punching these wee guys. You don't normally get close to them to do that, And I was on Facebook the other day there, and I was saying, look, how can we prove a UFO abduction? We can have all the GoPro cameras in the bedroom. You could tie the abductee's ankle to the bedpost. You could put chalk dust on the carpet for any footprints. You could put fluorescent paint on your legs and your arms for any wee hand marks. We don't seem to have anything. Yes, there is some videos on YouTube, but they could be dodgy, they could be fake. It seems to bypass. They can bypass all this technology. There must be a way of showing these wee guys when they're up to their tricks,
What survival tools have Gary and Colin employed over the years to help them keep their sanity and cope with all that happened to them? And in what ways has Gary and Colin's view of the world changed as a result of their abduction?
It's changed dramatically, obviously. Prior to the experience, they didn't believe in UFOs and life on other planets, but now they certainly do. Sadly, Colin, he's went right off the radar. We can't even contact Colin now. He wants nothing more to do about it. The last time I spoke to Colin for my book, it was a few years ago, and he said he's been getting terrible pains in his eye, and he's had this terrible skin problem as well. He reckons it's because of what happened to him. Because when he was in that curved chair, there was a device that came down from the ceiling. Maybe it was a wee bit like Travis Walton, but there was this thin needle went into the side of his eye. There were certain things done to him as well. It's really affected Colin quite dramatically because he wants nothing more to do about it. And with Gary, Gary went the other way. Gary joined SPI. Gary came on our investigations. He was a big part of another major Scottish event, which I'm happy to talk about if you want to, called the Falkland Hill UFO event. Gary was involved in that. So Gary's a very educated man now. He's a trainer's the wrong word, but he's working very, very well in the industry, and very, very clever man. He believes there's something behind this, and he just wants answers.
To a person who has been abducted by alien beings, Malcolm, and find they are reluctant to tell their experience to anyone for fear of being ridiculed, what advice would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, I would like to hear from anybody who has or believe they have an abduction experience. is the advice I would give you is find out for sure. Have a look at your body. Find out if there's any fresh scars on your body that you know personally were not there. You're not bumped into a piece of furniture and it's caused a mark. Something you know for sure is not be there. Try and recall as much as you can, because maybe 2% of abduction scenarios people can consciously recall everything. Very, very rare. It does happen though. I would like to hear as much from them as possible. Would I advocate hypnosis now? Yes, I guess I would, with caution. And all we're trying to do is find a pattern, because ufology is a big, big jigsaw puzzle. It's somebody's knocked on the floor. The pieces are all over Argentina, Peru, Chile, America, and we're putting people like your good self, we're nesting all these pieces together to try and find out what's the big picture. What is the big picture here, you know?
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy the A70 UFO Incident, Scotland's first officially reported UFO abduction, or any of your other books, and also learn about your society, Strange Phenomena Investigations, Scotland's oldest UFO paranormal society, how can they do that?
Yeah, my books are available on Amazon here in the UK and obviously America, Canada, and throughout Europe. Just go into Amazon, you'll see it there. And at the end of the day, the only reason I'm involved in the subject is purely and only to get the message across about these things are real, very, very real. I would ask my audience not to believe a word I say. Find out yourself, because the truth is there. It's like a big sieve, a big grid of a sieve. You're shaking it and all the rubbish is coming through, but you're left with these kernels that won't go through the wire mesh. I would not be in this field of study if I honestly didn't believe that mankind is dealing with some form of non-human alien intelligence. It's always been with us. We see it in Renaissance paintings, we see it in cave paintings. There is an agenda. What that agenda is, we don't know yet at the moment.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to join your organization or report to you about UFO experiences they've had, what is your contact information for that?
I can give you my email address for anybody who wants to contact me. It's I'll say it and then I'll spell it. It's Malky, SPI @yahoo.com. So spell that's MALCKY SPI @yahoo.com. Love to hear from you. Really would.
Malcolm Robinson, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Yakking with you has most informative. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, sir. Keep up the good work.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you're amongst the first to receive new interviews when they're released and to have access to previous ones, subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.